Hello out there in Radio Land. This is Michael. This is the Street Preacher's Corner podcast. The podcast where we compensate for a lack of skill with enthusiasm. Well, if the indicators are any indication of anything, um, we have a lot of people listening all of a sudden that weren't listening before, and I don't know why, and thank you for coming, and hopefully you don't regret it. Well, one of the things we do here at the Street Preacher Corner podcast, or as we like to casually call it around the office, we call it just the corner. And what we like to do here at the corner, one of the great joys of my life is I like to dig through thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of very densely written old church history books or old church newsletters or old different articles written on things. I do a metric butt ton of reading for everything. Just if I wasn't doing this podcast, I would still be doing the reading. I would still be taking notes. I've got, and you guys think this is just whatever, but I've got thousands of handwritten pages of notes on every conceivable subject, things that interest me. Sometimes I never see it all the way through. Sometimes I do. But anyway, so as I'm reading through all this stuff, a lot of stuff is just dry, and some of it's whatever. You gotta go through a lot to get a little sometimes. But sometimes I will find some little forgotten article that some guy wrote, some little nobody like me that has been dead, a century or more, and something he wrote that was a real blessing. And I just think it's great that I can find this stuff, and that I have the natural talent to find this stuff and to be able to pull it forward and present it to you, because to me, it's like that guy's not dead, Like I don't know how many people read his thing when he was around, but here we are 100 years later, 200 years later, 400 years later, and I can take something he contributed and once again use it to be a blessing to the body of Christ. The reason I did that big long intro is I wanted to read you something. This is from the Herald of Gospel Liberty. It was a publication put out by a Baptist association, and I'm in the middle of researching something else entirely, and I found this, and I went, "Oh, that's kind of cool." It has nothing to do with what I was researching, but let's do it. So this guy had written this article, and his name is J. Vincent Knight, and the name of the article is "The Battlefield of Prayer." Life is a great warfare between the forces of evil on one hand, the forces of righteousness on the other. These stand arrayed against each other, and he who would be successful in overcoming the evil must realize that Christ is his captain, the church his training station, and that prayer is the great battlefield upon which all his battles are to be fought and his greatest victory won. The real hero of the day is the man whose strength will not fail, even though the enemy press hard against him. For happy is he who in the period of his training learned no retreat, and that all things are possible to him who prays the prayer of simple faith and trust, for God can always use a man who meets the demands of the Christian life and depends upon his prayer life for his strength and fortitude. Look for an illustration of this great truth, and you will find a Napoleon sitting in perfect silence for hours before ordering the great Russian campaign, a Washington at Valley Forge praying over questions over which the independence of our country hung, a Wilson in the White House, not a great example, a Wilson in the White House pondering over questions upon which the freedom of the world hangs, and a Christ in the garden praying for courage to submit himself to the divine will of Almighty God, wherein he conquered through that prayer so agonized that the great drops turned to blood. But through the sign he conquered, and brought salvation to the world of mankind as a free gift. First of all, prayer is the field upon which we overcome temptation. No man, be he young, old, small, or great, is free from temptation. And while God does not permit us to go untempted and untried, he has made possible a way for our escape. For no temptation hath taken us but such as is common to man, and Jesus has with the temptation provided a way for our escape. We battle with our appetites, our eager desire for graft, for gold, for gain, for glory, for honor, for praise of men. These temptations are often too difficult for us to overcome, all because we have unconsciously let them get the upper hand of us. But though we falter and fail and fall, our captain has never failed, and we are sure to overcome if we follow his command, for he has promised to go with us even to the end of the world. But there are conditions to Christ's promises. If he is to carry us safely through the storms of temptation that assail us, we must meet those conditions. He commands that we follow him. He is under no obligation to carry those who will not follow. He says that we must ask, that is to pray, not because he is not already acquainted with our needs, but because we need the lessons of humility, dependence, and submission. Then he commands that we serve. Thousands of good men and women have failed to receive answers to prayer because they failed to serve. We must be willing not only to pray, but we must be ready to take off our coats and help to answer those prayers if we are to gain the victory for our captain and king. And then prayer is the place where we get courage and strength for our daily task. In the 6th chapter of Ephesians, we have a wonderful warlike passage. Here the writer's most significant words are, stand fast. Here the man is armed for conflict, and then the climax reads, with all prayer, praying, etc. To the apostle, prayer has a wonderful warlike aspect. He recognizes that if one is to come out conqueror, he must have power. And there is nothing to him more powerful than prayer. We need more men today of that same type of manhood, men who will not only give, but men who will use the channel of prayer and will in turn let God use them for channels of blessing to the lost world. Our army and navy are strong, gallant, and powerful, but they will be doubly strong, yea, unconquerable, if our people back home will pray daily for them. For you cannot conquer a praying people. Listen to the words of one of our strong men who is now somewhere in France. This is in 1918, by the way, World War I. Listen to the words of one of our strong men who is now somewhere in France as he says, we need supplies, we need social, moral, and intellectual environments coming from the homeland, but what we need most of all is the united prayers of our loved ones at home that we may be strong, for the most deadly enemy here is not the German. Most people give up in times of disaster, but Jesus made it a matter of prayer. And when his soul was heavy and his heart pained, he resorted to the mountainside, and there spent the night in prayer, and there overcame. Hear him say, I have overcome the world. So may we, if we pray, overcome every difficult task. Finally, prayer is a place where we catch a vision of God's will concerning us. Someone has said every life has its valley, mountainside, and hilltop experiences. That is true, but not the whole truth, for every life also has its Gethsemane. If the problems of life were so great that Jesus had his, then how about the average Christian? Is it not even more necessary for us? But what is that Gethsemane? Is it not the place where we catch a vision of God's will concerning us? In that garden, Jesus did not pass the cup by, but he did catch such a vision of God's will concerning him that he readily consented to drink the bitter contents of that cup. Not his will, but God's will must be done. Yes, every life must have its Gethsemane. It may be alone in some secluded spot, at home around the family altar, or somewhere else that we submit ourselves wholly to the will of God, but be it here or there, such must come before we are thoroughly prepared for being ushered into God's presence. When Jesus said, let this cup pass, he ended his prayer by saying, thy will be done. Such must be the climax of every Christian's prayer if we expect a definite answer from God. If our prayers are meager efforts to bring God's will under subjection to our wants, such prayers will never be answered because they fail to meet the divine approbation of God. Our wills must be under subjection to his will. Our prayers must not be a complex combination of compound sentences making known our wants. Listen to the words of that great blind hymn writer, Fanny J. Crosby, as she weaves her daily prayer into a song. Jesus, my Lord, thy voice I hear. Bid me now by faith draw near, near to the fount so pure within, cleansing my soul from every sin. Jesus, my trust, this heart is thine, kept by the power of grace divine. Help me to rise my cares above, filled with thy deep, unbounded love. Jesus, my life, O guide my way, onward from earth to endless day. Soon I may reach the heavenly shore, there to abide evermore. Oh, she desires, says, Jesus, my Lord, I come to thee, open the gates of prayer for me. I come to thee, I come to thee, open the gates of prayer for me. Well, here, how we must love that most beautiful praise. Open the gates of prayer for me. Not that I may enter into my narrow ambitions and selfish desires, but that I may also go out to the world and bless humanity with my own prayer life. Truly, she struck the keynote to the prayer life, for those who receive must in return be willing to give. But we must go beyond the realm of the individual life. Every church must have its Gethsemane if it fulfills the great commission Christ gave it. It must, like its great head, overcome itself and be subject unto the will of God. It was born to die. It was born to give its life for the world. It cannot do otherwise than to drink the bitter cup and sacrifice itself for lost men. Its only business in the world is to bring men to the Christ who founded it. It must give itself to prayer for every forward step it has ever taken, every great battle fought, and every victory won was first planned, fought, and won on the battlefield of prayer. I fear many of us have, like the disciples of old, been found asleep when our great leader returned from the sacred place of prayer. If this is the case, we need not be surprised that we have failed. Our own beloved Zion has not made the progress that was possible during the last century. Why? Probably because our great leader has been forced to look down upon a people asleep on the great questions of evangelism and Christian missions. If so, the great command of the Master is, awake, arise, and let us be going. The call of the captain is heard. To this training station many have already gone, and now we face the great period of action. We must not fail. We will not fail, for we will give ourselves unreservedly into the hands of our leader, Jesus Christ. We'll preach, we'll pay, we'll pull, we'll pray until the Lord says it's enough. Our prayer life will be so strong, we'll forget how to retreat. For Christ's true followers know no retreat. There you go. And on that note, Mark lesson, I think this is 23. That's what it looks like anyway. Mark lesson 23. I had joked before. Actually, I'd done the math. It wasn't a joke. I'd done the math that this was going to take 208 lessons to get through Mark. At the rate we were going, I think we just picked it up and sped it up a little bit, but not too much, I don't think. Mark 3, verse 16 is where we're going to be at. We talked about the 12 disciples, the 12 apostles. Not the 12 disciples, the 12 apostles. And we went through the names here. We're going to read them again here just for continuity's sake. And Simon he surnamed Peter, and James the son of Zebedee, and John the brother of James, and he surnamed them Boanerges, which is the sons of thunder, and Andrew, and Philip, and Bartholomew, and Matthew, and Thomas, and James the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, and Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, which also betrayed him, and they went into a house. So the same list is given in Luke 6, verse 13 to 16. The same list is given in Matthew 10, verse 1 through 5. The same list is given in minus Judas is given in Acts 1. It's almost given in exactly the same order. And if I had to take a wild guess as to why that is, I wouldn't say because Peter, James, and John are more important than anybody else. I would say that Peter, James, and John are the first three on the list because they were the first three disciples. I think it's done, if I had to take a wild guess, that it's done in the order in which they met Jesus Christ. It seems to hold it for the first 4 or 5. Although, you could make the case that Andrew had met Christ before Peter because Andrew was one of John's disciples. Now, in the other two accounts, a couple of the guys have different names. If you lay, Luke's list and Mark's list and Matthew's list and Acts list, and you lay them all side by side, you're going to see some of those guys in there have different names. So that's very simple. That's no big deal. That's nothing to get upset about. I'll give you an example. I could say that John F. Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. I could say that JFK was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. I could say that Jack Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. I could say that, and you would understand that even though I give you 3 names for the same person, you understand that I am talking about the same person. This is really you see it just in the example that I just gave you right there. But in Oriental culture, and I'm not saying, that's whatever, but Oriental culture, a lot of times, depending on what circle of your life you're functioning in, you'll have a different name. You have one name that you use at work. You'll have one name you use in town. You have one name you use with close family. The Filipinos, man, it drives me a little nuts because those guys all have, as much as I love them, they'll have several different names. And I'm trying to figure out, well, this is the name you gave me. Does that mean you count me as a close friend, or am I just, whatever? But anyway, but when you look at this list of apostles, which are also disciples, but when you look at this list, what you realize is there's actually an awful lot of brothers in the crowd. For example, we know that Simon, Peter, and Andrew, they're brothers. We know that from previous passages in Mark. We know that James and John, Boanerges, the sons of thunder, that nickname seems to be as much about their dad as it is about them. And their dad's name was Zebedee, and that's the only time he's ever mentioned as being their dad. But then they get the name of sons of thunder. You have James, the son of Alphaeus, and you have Judas, the brother of James, which means Judas is also the son of Alphaeus. But then if you go over to Matthew 1, Matthew Levi, the author of the book of Levi, he's also described as being the son of Alphaeus. So you have Simon and Andrew that are brothers. You have James and John that are brothers. You have James and Judas and Matthew that are brothers. So one of the teachings, and I've heard this, and I don't know that anybody even, I don't know, this is something that you hear people say, that I don't think anybody teaches it, because it's just something that's said out of ignorance, I guess. They would say that because there are 12 apostles, and they're going to be sitting on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel, there has to be one from each tribe. But that's not even close to being true. I mean, Jesus' entire ministry, on earthbound ministry, takes place within 100 miles of where he was born. So he doesn't go to the entire land of Israel. Now, my understanding is there's lots of cross traffic and people come from all over for different things, for different feasts and festivals and such. But in this group of 7 guys, you have 3 sets of brothers. So you can't say that they're all different tribes, because they're not. I mean, half the group's kin to the other half. So what else? Well, I was thinking about the fact that you have families where, I don't know how many kids they had, but they had at least 3 sons that wound up being apostles and being the foundation of the church of Jesus Christ. So can you just imagine? I mean, you always expect great things in your kids. You always hope for great things. Can you imagine the amount of prayer and seed sowing and good godly raising that went into the lives of guys like James and John, or Simon and Andrew, or James and Judas and Matthew, to where 3 of your sons get chosen by the Lord of glory to be the foundation of the church? I mean, that's really something. And some of these guys, all we know about them is their names, and we see some of these guys rise to great prominence in the book of Acts. You see some of these guys rise to great prominence in the Gospels, and some of them, all we know about them is their name. I mean, you can't tell me, 5 things about Bartholomew. It's just not there. And so, moving on to verse 20. I'm sorry, and Judas Iscariot, which also betrayed him, and they went into a house. Yeah, we did read that. Verse 20, the multitude cometh together again, so they could not so much as eat bread. And when his friends heard of it, they went out to lay hold on him, for they said, he is beside himself. So we've talked about this before, how Jesus Christ had friends who were unbelievers. And we talked about how interesting that is, that the people that had grown up with him, they couldn't have anything wrong with them, but that didn't necessarily mean they want to become disciples of his. But when his husband, or I'm sorry, when his friends heard of it, what is the it? Well, the it is verse 18 to 20, the calling of the disciples. So apparently it's one thing in their mind to preach and say, repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand, you must be born again, all those things that Jesus said. It is another thing entirely to call disciples and call apostles, and there was something going on here that made the people that had grown up with Jesus in Nazareth, it made them feel like they had to get involved in there and all that kind of stuff. And then we're going to go to verse 22. And the scribes which came down from Jerusalem said, he hath Beelzebub, and by the prince of devils casteth he out devils. Now it's important to understand that verse 22 is not a reaction to verse 21. Verse 22 is a reaction to the events in Matthew 12. We're going to look at them real quick. Matthew 12, verse 22 to 24. Then there was brought unto him one possessed with a devil, blind and dumb, and he healed him, insomuch that the blind and dumb both spake and saw. And all the people were amazed, and said, is this not the son of David? And when the Pharisees heard it, they said, this fellow doth not cast out devils, but by Beelzebub, the prince of devils. So when the scribes say that he hath Beelzebub and the prince, that they're saying that not because he called disciples, they're saying that because he cast a devil out of a fellow, and he healed some blind folks and such as all that. They're also reacting to Luke 11, the same situation. Luke 11. When at all possible, here at the corner, we like to run all the references. Verse 14, he was casting out a devil, and it was dumb. And it came to pass, and the devil was gone out, the dumb spake, and the people wondered. But some of them said, he had cast out devil through Beelzebub, the chief of the devil. So just you understand, that passage in Mark that we started out in, Mark 22, Mark 3:22. That's not a reaction to him calling disciples. That's a reaction to him healing people, which is really bizarre. You would over and over again you see in the ministry of Jesus Christ where he does good and it drives people insane. He does good and everybody gets mad. And so, maybe we ought to get a hold of a little bit of that. And of course, I don't know. Can I just share? And I've probably said this before to some of you in person. I know I've said it from behind pulpits. Over in the book of Acts, you have this this situation where the apostles are taken and beaten and scourged and said, "You're not going to preach anymore in Jesus' name." And they said, "We ought to obey God rather than man." And they beat him and they turn him loose out in the street. And it says that they rejoiced that they were counted worthy to suffer for his name. It's always, I don't say always, it occasionally bothers me that I haven't suffered more. And I wonder within myself, does that mean that God does not trust me to suffer for his name? I mean, I've gone through some stuff compared to what other people have gone through. Fine, whatever. People, I preach on the street, I'm a big, bad, tough joker, whatever. But I don't have any stripes. I haven't done any jail time. There's a lot the other people have gone through in the past, and the other people are going through right now that I haven't gone through. And, verse 22, and the scribes which came down from Jerusalem said, I was going somewhere with that, and it just got up and walked away. The scribes which came down from Jerusalem said, he hath Beelzebub, and by the prince of the devils casting out devils. I really wondered who these scribe guys were. And so I wondered who the scribes guys were, and I ran the references, and I didn't get a whole lot of that. I did do some research that says a scribe is obviously a writer, or a notary public, or a clerk to the king, or an officer who keeps the rolls of the army. So these guys are traveling about. Whenever you see the scribes, you see them in the company of the Pharisees. So I don't know if their job was to walk around and write things down that the Pharisees said. I'm not entirely sure what their job is, but they're always traveling. You never see the scribes by themselves. They're always traveling with the Pharisees. And so they said, he hath Beelzebub, and by the prince of the devils casteth he out devils. So we got to talk about Beelzebub for just a minute, just to settle this out. Verse 20, so Beelzebub is an Old Testament Canaanite deity that in the Old Testament is called yeah, exactly. It's called that, and then probably some other things. It's called Baal-zebub of Ekron, and every time he's mentioned in the Old Testament, he is associated with a very particular city, the city of Ekron, which is a Canaanite city. Now, every time you see Beelzebub mentioned, like I said, he's mentioned as being the god of Ekron, sort of like Diana of the Ephesians. The city has a patron. I was going to say a patron saint, but in this case, it's a patron devil. It's the patron god of a town. And Ekron is not a good neighborhood. So, and if you go to Joshua 13, we're not going to look at it. I'm just going to tell you that's where it's at. After the invasion of Canaan, after the conquest of Canaan, Ekron is one of those areas that never got subjugated, where the children of Israel really dropped the ball in their conquest of the land of Canaan. In Joshua 13, it's mentioned as still belonging to the Canaanites. Even at the end of Joshua and the days of Judges, and then the days of the early Kings, even as far as 1 Samuel. You remember that story in 1 Samuel where the Philistines captured the ark and they took it to the temple of Dagon, and they put it in there with Dagon, and the Dagon statue kept falling over, and they came in the next morning, and the heads and the hands of the statue had been cut off, apparently by the ark just being there. And the Philistines said, "Oh, we got to get this thing out of here," and they put it on a cart, and they bit a bunch of golden mice. It's a very strange story. Little golden mice, and they sent the cart, and the cart went on its way back. It went to Ekron, and where Beelzebub was the prince, the chief deity there, the chief devil, and it was such a Canaanite stronghold that when the people that lived in Ekron saw that the ark was there, they panicked because they knew that the ark was still. They lived in fear of the Ark of the Covenant. So anyway, the Israelites. You have to think about this. The Israelites had done such a poor job of driving out the Canaanites. Here we are, centuries later. I mean, David's dead and gone. Solomon's dead and gone. I mean, we're hundreds of years down the road here, centuries later. Everybody still knew. So one of the things that the children of Israel were told to do when they were told to go into a land, they were told to subjugate it, they were told to conquer the people, and they were told to do all this stuff they were told to do. And one of the things they were told to do is they were told to destroy all memory of these false gods, burn down their temples, tear down their altars, stamp out their pictures. Don't talk about them, don't think about them, don't dwell on them, because if you do, they will be a snare to you and the children of Israel. And so they did such a poor job of doing that centuries after the last Canaanite is been killed or whatever, or centuries after Joshua was supposed to have conquered that place, Joshua and obviously the armies of Israel, centuries after that, the name is still around. Like they didn't say Beelzebub, and everybody went, who? I mean, it's so that's a bad sign. Like when you say Beelzebub, Prince of Devils, and everybody knows who you're talking about, it's not a good sign. So everybody knew. Think about this: when you're calling him Beelzebub, Prince of the Devils, not only does everybody there know who you're talking about, but they know the mythology surrounding Beelzebub. Beelzebub had a title. I mean, they might have called him devils. They might not have called him whatever. The Israelites at least had that much sense. But they weren't supposed to mention him at all. So, to me, maybe this is not the best analogy, but where I sit right now, in my disclosed location, in my underground, above-ground bunker, this land that we sit on used to be thick with Cherokee Indians. And, they ran off, or they were run off, or whatever. Yeah, they're not here anymore. I mean, there's some here, but not near as many as there were. And the Cherokees had their mythology, and they had their pagan gods, and they had their devils they bowed down to. We went to a powwow, because like I said, there's Cherokee right here and whatever. So we went to this powwow, and it was bizarre. It was bizarre. First of all, the head of the Cherokee Nation in Georgia is a Choctaw, because I couldn't find a Cherokee that wanted the job. I'm getting way off track here. But my point is that these Cherokee lived here and died here and had their mythology here and had their ceremonies here, and I don't know anything about it. And that's nothing unusual, because they were conquered, they were driven out, they were subjugated, right or wrong, good or evil, whatever you want to say about that. What happened was happened, and now there's a bunch of Europeans living here and a handful of Choctaw and Cherokee. And so their ways died out, and their methods died out, and their gods died out. Nobody. I mean, it's just not something like. But America has its own mythology. America, 21st century America, there's some things that aren't true, but you still know a lot of facts about it. Every American, whether they like Christmas, hate Christmas, indifferent towards Christmas, you stop the average American on the street, and you'd be amazed how much that average American knows about Santa Claus. We all know the rule. We all know how it works. We all know what he wears. We all know where he lives. We all know who his wife is. We all know about his workers. We know how he gets back and forth from where he's going. We know all the physical attributes of him. We know all these things, and that's a working mythology about something that we even understand that is not true. But that mythology is at the top of our brain, because that's our culture. Now, how weird would it be is if me, as a guy who is white as paper, was as familiar with the Cherokee mythology as I am with Santa Claus? You say, Mike, where are you going with this? I'm just saying, these guys should have been able to say Beelzebub, Prince of Devils, and everybody will, who? I mean, one of the things I've gone through, we've talked about in this podcast when we're going through the book of Mark, is what terrible shape the nation of Israel was when Jesus Christ is born. They're in terrible shape. They got devils, they got leprosy, they got blindness, and they are casually, conversationally familiar with the names of pagan gods that they were told to forget. I mean, here he is. Yep, that showed up on the recording. I live in a very safe neighborhood. I really do. And that sound you just heard is proof that it's a safe neighborhood. Where was I? Yeah, so that's a bad sign when you're told to wipe these guys out and destroy their gods, and here you are with his name in your mouth. Look at Jeremiah 17. Jeremiah 17. I spent a lot of time in Jeremiah. I tell you, man, things run together. I don't know how long ago anything was anymore. I say it was a couple of years ago, and it turns out it was like 10 years ago or whatever. Jeremiah 17. We'll look at what the Lord told these folks in regards to these matters. The sin of Judah, 17 verse 1. The sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron and with the point of a diamond. It is graven upon the table of thy heart and upon the horns of your altars, whilst their children remember their altars and their groves by the green trees upon the high hill. So God lays it out, and he says, those people remember their gods, you don't remember their gods. But here we are, Beelzebub, prince of devils, and everybody knows who you're talking about. It's wild stuff. But, you get, turn back to Mark 3, you get Jesus' view on the whole thing, because when he repeats back to them what they said, he changes some words. I'll show you. Mark 3, they said, he hath Beelzebub, by the prince of devils casteth he out devils. He called them unto him, and he said to them in parables, how can Satan cast out Satan? So they said Beelzebub, and Jesus said Satan. So according to Jesus, Beelzebub, he is Satan. I don't know how you get around that. It's just it is what it is. And to me, maybe nobody else thinks it's funny, but so according to Jesus, Beelzebub's real name is not Beelzebub. Jesus' his real name is Satan. And so you could establish that, I think we can from the scriptures, that Satan is pretending on the world stage to be this entire pantheon of entities in order to receive worship. We're going to look at Psalm 106. Psalm 106. I was talking to a guy one time who said he was a Thor worshiper. And I've run into several Thor worshipers that are all young men in their 20s that are, didn't have a dad in their house or something. And, and so they're looking for this masculine archetype to put their confidence in. They don't understand that Jesus is the masculine archetype, that all that other stuff is a poor imitation of. But anyway, this guy, he'd grown a big beard. He was, he was kind of a burly fella, and he was, he had, in his mind, he was a Viking, and in his mind, he was Thor. And so I asked him, I said, do you really think that there's somebody out there named Thor that hears your prayers and receives them and cares about what you need or what you think or what you want? And he didn't want to talk about that. He wanted to talk about something else. And I said, no, you need to get to this. I said, because what happens? Let's say Thor is real, and you are giving him your devotion and your devotion. And then you just decide to slack off, or you decide you want to worship Zeus for a while. Is Thor going to get angry? Are there any repercussions? Because, you're going to have this pantheon. You say this is a real thing. You say, I worship Thor. That tells me you believe there is a Thor. And what are the implications if there is a Thor? People just don't think. They just say stuff. Can Thor hear you? Does Thor care? Bible says we have a high priest that can be touched with the feeling, can be touched with the feel of our infirmities. It says he'll never leave us nor forsake us. Jesus knows. Jesus cares. Jesus exists. Thor may or may not exist. Psalm 106. Verse looks like, I wrote a bunch of verses down. There we go. 37. 106 verse 37. Let's back up. Let's see. They did not destroy the nations, verse 34. Concerning whom the Lord commanded them, but were mingled among the heathen and learned their works. That's what you're seeing there in Mark 3. You're seeing a group of people that have mingled among the heathen and learned their works. And they served their idols, which were a snare unto them. Yea, they sacrificed their sons and their daughters unto devils. So according to Jesus Christ, false gods are not just some harmless thing where you're just bound down to nothing. There is an entity behind that receives and wants worship. Isaiah 14. Verse 12. How thou art fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning, how thou art cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations. For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, I will also sit upon the mountain of the congregation in the sides of the north, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, I will be like the Most High. So Satan is directly interested in receiving worship. And he will do it under another name. He'll do it under an entire pantheon of names. Yeah. So in your best case, so you pray to Beelzebub, you pray to Mary, you Fatima, you pray to Zeus, you pray to whatever. Your best case scenario is that you're talking to someone who isn't even there. And your worst case scenario is you are talking to a devil that is masquerading as something else. Do you ever notice? You can go through Book of Kings and Book of Chronicles, and you'll see over and over again, a little bit in Samuel, but really real heavy, hardcore in Kings, how there'll be a bunch of Baalite worship going on, and some prophet will show up, or some good king will get on the throne, and he will kill all the Baalite priests, and he'll burn down the temple, and he'll cut down the groves, and he will just wipe out their name from among heaven. Just stomp them to the ground. And then on its own, Baal worship springs back up in about 2 generations. You got to wonder, how do these people even know how to worship Baal? How do they even know who Baal is? If you destroy all remnant of it, and you outlaw the mention of its even name, how do they know? Well, I submit to you, it's because there's an active intelligence behind Baal worship. That when you stomp it all out, the minute you let your guard down, that active intelligence, that malevolent entity that Jesus Christ refers to as Satan, he shows back up on the scene. He starts stirring men's hearts up to worship him under all these different false gods. So God's opinion is that the false gods aren't myths necessarily; they are devils and Satan. And 1 Corinthians 10, just to beat this horse a little longer. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 19. What say I then? That the idol is anything, or that which is offered in sacrifice to idols is anything? But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils and not to God. And I would not that you should have fellowship with devils. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of the devils. You cannot be takers of the Lord's table and the table of devils. Do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? So the implication is that when you bow down to a false god, you're worshiping a devil. Not only that, but you are angering God. You are picking a fight with God, and it is a fight you cannot win. And so, so God has very little interest in things like diversity or cultural acknowledgement or honoring the cultural history of yada yada yada. Sometimes, we go through, and you see this a lot in Western countries in America. We'll go and we'll take this group of people that were just absolute devils. The Aztecs were absolute devils, and I'm okay with studying the past. I'm okay with documenting what kind of people they were, but I'm not in favor of pretending that they were anything other than devil worshipping devils. That they were just terrible human beings, and they were primitives whose ancestors had rejected the light that God gave their ancestors, and plunged their entire society into darkness. And without the written revelation of Scripture, without the light of God shining in their hearts, what they came up with was stupid nonsense like the hummingbird god. Let's bow down to the hummingbird god, and let's take our children and cut their hearts out and spill blood on this altar we made to keep the sun going across the sky. They had all kinds of stupid notions like that, because idolatry makes you stupid. And God has very little interest in it. So we'll take these things and we'll make these little museums, we'll make these little displays, and we say, we're going to honor the memory of these people that were here before. Well, I'm okay with documenting the people that were here before, but I don't know they necessarily deserve any honor if they were bowing down to devils. Oh, we have to acknowledge the virtue and value of their culture. Some cultures are kind of worthless. Some cultures produce godliness and righteousness and morality and art and literature and music and civilization and send fleets of ships across the ocean to discover new lands and build roads and bridges and buildings and hospitals. And some civilizations and some societies sit in the dirt, squat in the dirt in a loincloth, and eat a child every once in a while if the weather doesn't go right. So no, not all civilizations are created equal. Not all cultures are worth honoring, but you can document them. God's opinion appears to be that if it isn't me, it's a devil. And that is, I tell you, man, that is just so terribly, terribly narrow-minded of him. I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes to the Father but by me. I guess Jesus didn't get the memo that there are, many roads to the top and many ways to God, and maybe should have asked Oprah. Verse 24. I'm sorry, we're back in Mark. Those of you that are listening, now you see why so few people listen. They get about 3 minutes into something of me saying something, and they're like, yeah, this guy's a clown, and time to move on. And maybe that's, that's justified. I mean, I don't particularly care to listen to me, so why would anybody else? Verse 24, 3:24. How can Satan cast out Satan? I'm sorry, it's verse 23. And if a kingdom be divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. Now, this is totally off topic and very much out of context, but it's also true as a standalone statement that that a kingdom divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. You see that in Ephesians 4, where we're commanded as the church to endeavor to keep the unity of the Spirit and the bonds of peace, because the very fact that Ephesians 4 says you have to endeavor, that means it's hard. You have to do it with forbearance. You have to do it with love. But unity in a church, unity in a body of believers is an unstoppable force. And it does not mean that we're always going to agree on everything, but that we agree on the things we agree on. I was just part of a church meeting where we had to get some stuff hammered out. And because we were endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit and the bonds of peace, because we were endeavoring to, consider everyone greater than ourselves, because we were endeavoring to forbear one another in love, the meeting went pretty good, actually. And we all left as friends. So like I said, it doesn't always mean what we agree on, that we agree on everything, but that we do agree on the things that we agree on. And there's some gray area here, and there's some hills that are worth dying on, but, what are the essentials? And that's a list that changes throughout a person's life. I have a different list of what I consider the essentials for fellowship now, 27, 28 years into this thing, than I did when I first started out. I'd like to think I'm getting more gracious and more mature. I can give you examples with varying degrees of applicability. I knew a guy who's a good guy, man. I love him dearly, love his wife, love his kids. They left a church because, maybe I'm misrepresenting what his thing, but this is the conversation we had. They did not believe in segregating Sunday school classes. Like, they did not believe there should be a class for the fifth graders and a class for the fourth graders and a class for the adults and a class for the young teens and a class for the old teens. They thought that unnecessarily split the family up. And I can at least respect that position. But that's not something you leave a church over. I mean, no one makes you take your kid to if you want to keep your kid in the main service with you, just keep the kid in the main service with you. Nobody's going to care. I used to knock doors with a guy who had some crazy notions. Not Darnell, somebody else. And I know what you're going to think. The legendary Darnell G. Robinson has crazy notions? No. He does, but not about this. I used to knock doors with a guy with some crazy notions about just about everything. I mean, you pick a topic, he's got an opinion, and it's 4 degrees off from every other opinion you've ever heard. But we were agreed on, and we were unified in the gospel, so we were able to go knock doors together, and because of that, we got some serious door knocking done, and I think the gospel went out, and I think the Lord was pleased, because after all, a house divided against itself cannot stand. But the opposite is also true, that a house united can't fall. Sometimes the price of unity is you allow the other guy to be an idiot, and you put up with him out of genuine brotherly love and for him and charity towards him. In fact, the mark of Christian maturity is not necessarily how much Bible you know, but the mark of Christian maturity is charity and forbearance. And that's not apostasy, that's maturity. It's not compromise, it's maturity. The mark of a carnal Christian, according to 1 Corinthians, another sermon for another time, but we're going to touch on this because we're going to. My podcast, I can say what I want, right? The mark of Christian maturity, the definition of carnality in 1 Corinthians is not that they listened to the wrong kind of music or had the wrong version of the Bible or had the wrong standards about this or that other thing. The mark of carnality in 1 Corinthians is that they couldn't get along with other people. They were disunified. And God has made us members one of another. And so all that. There is definitely a point where the differences are too sharp or too important, but most disunity that I've seen in my own life and church life among other people, most disunity is over trivial things. You didn't get your way, you didn't like this, you didn't like that, and so you're going to pout and you're going to remove your presence and your fellowship from other people, and you should really just quit being an idiot. Maybe you need to look around at the people you worship with or your people in your house or the people you're married to, and you need to focus on what you agree on. That has nothing to do with the verse I just read. Verse 25. And if a house be divided against itself, that house cannot stand. That quote, we were driving down the road and I saw this billboard. It had a picture of Abraham Lincoln, not my favorite president. In fact, if I was to make a list of my 5 least favorite presidents, Abraham Lincoln would be like 1 through 4. But anyway, I had the picture of Lincoln had a quote next to it, attributed to him, said, "A house divided itself against itself shall not stand." Well, he didn't quote. That's not original from Abraham Lincoln. That's original from Jesus. And consider the audacity of talking about a house divided itself cannot stand when you just invaded a country that had declared its own independence. I digress. Verse 26 and 27. We're going to just poke at this a little bit before we launch out into the unpardonable sin, which is probably not happening today because I've spent too much time on other things. Verse 26. And if Satan rise up against himself, and be divided, he cannot stand, but hath an end. No man can enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods, except he will first bind the strong man, and then he will spoil his house. Okay. We're going to stop there. I'm going to talk about verse 27 because I don't know if you've ever stopped and thought about this a lot. Well, okay, so let's pick up Matthew 12 as the parallel passage. Matthew 12, verse... Oh, come on, man. I just saw it. Matthew 12, verse 29. Or else how can one enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods, except he first bind the strong man, then he will spoil his house. Now, there's a handful of ways to apply this. We got to define some words in verse 27. The goods. The strong man is Satan. That's the context is playing there from other things. So, if you're going to talk about what the strong man's goods are, you got to say the world, right? Over in the temptation of the wilderness. The devil says, these kingdoms of the world are mine, and they're mine to give to whom I want. So the goods that belong to the strong man are the kingdoms of this world, among other things. They're also the people that are under direct satanic control. You see that in Matthew 12, verse 42 to 45, and in Luke 11, 24. People who have devils in them, and they are not themselves. They're acting they're doing what the devils want them to do. That would qualify as goods, right? So here's the question, and okay, let's back a little bit. So if this world is the devil's kingdom, which he's the god of this world according to 1 Corinthians 4 and Mark 1 and probably 2 or 3 other places I could name, if he is the god of this world, if this world system is controlled by him, then it means all the humanitarian and philanthropic work you can do in the world will not fix the world. You should relieve suffering when you can. You should show kindness when you can. Those are scriptural ideas. But you are not going to fix this place. This world is a crummy place because the guy running it is a crummy guy. And the world is how he wants it. And the world is how a wicked, unregenerate man wants it. And as long as that strong man is loose, you're not fixing it. Okay, I don't think I've said anything there that anybody that has any sense would bother to disagree with. Okay, So now we got to figure this out, though. Jesus said, if you're going to spoil the strong man's stuff, you're going to take his stuff, you're going to spoil his goods, spoil his house, you have to bind the strong man first, right? So when Jesus liberated people from devil possession, wasn't he taking back the devil's goods? Wasn't he taking things from the devil's kingdom and taking them for himself? When Jesus regenerates a lost man, and that man translates from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of his dear son, when the handwriting of ordinances against that man is taken out of the way, and that man is reconciled back unto God, isn't Jesus Christ technically spoiling the devil's house? You say, of course, Mike. Okay, well then let's look at 1 Peter 5. So for Jesus to be spoiling the strong man and be spoiling his goods and taking his house, by Jesus' own admission, the strong man has to be bound before that spoiling can happen. Right? Okay. 1 Peter 5. Be sober, this is verse 8, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. So according to my New Testament, Satan is not bound right now. He's not. He's walking about as a roaring lion. Where's that other verse? Romans 16? Romans 16. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans. Romans 16. Right there at the end. Verse 20. And the God of peace shall bruise Satan under your feet shortly. So in the Garden of Eden, God told Adam and Eve that the seed of the woman would come along, and he would bruise the head of the serpent, and the serpent would bruise his heel. And it is a very typical teaching that the serpent's head was bruised at Calvary, although the Bible never actually says that. In fact, according to Romans 16, at least at the time that Romans 16 was written, Satan's head had not been bruised, because Paul speaks of it as being a future event. So you have a bound entity that is running loose, and you have a bruised entity that still has a bruising left to happen. Some of this is the fact that God regularly speaks about things that haven't happened yet in the past tense. That's part of it. And so that also means that all this charismatic claptrap about I'm going to bind Satan, it's a bunch of hooey. The Bible tells you to resist him, not to bind him. So the binding and the bruising are, well, you see it in Revelation 20. You see that the devil is bound. That's the word it uses. This says the devil is bound for 1,000 years. Okay. So the bruising is a future event according to Romans 16. The binding is a future event according to Revelation 20. So how was Jesus taking away elements of Satan's kingdom without binding the strong man first? Because he himself said the strong man had to be bound first. And I know I'm saying this over and over again, so I'm trying to get this through your head, that according to Jesus' own rules that Jesus set up, Jesus shouldn't have been able to do those things. So he can do whatever he wants. Sure. But it looks like the rules he set for himself are, we won't take away his stuff until he's bound, because that's how that works. But in verse 29, I said verse 29. Matthew 12, again. I should have stayed there, got a bookmark or something. Matthew 12. Matthew 12's got an interesting little slant on this. And if Satan casts out Satan, verse 26, how he's divided against himself, how then shall his kingdom stand? And if I by Beelzebub cast out devils, by whom do your children cast them out? So he's speaking to the Pharisees, and he says, well, if I'm doing it by the devils, how are your children doing it? Which indicates that the Pharisees were casting out devils. And I've never heard anybody preach on that one. Therefore, they shall be your judges. And says verse 29, or else how can one enter to a strong man's house and spoil his goods except he first bind the strong man, and he will spoil his house? So Jesus sort of indicates here that Satan is bound, right? The statement is, how else could I be doing this except Satan is bound? And here he is doing it. So Satan must be bound, except we know that according to Romans 16, he's not bound yet. We know according to Revelation 20, he's not bound yet. See what I mean? This is the sort of things that I think about late at night. Really, this is what I do. Okay, so I'm going to submit to you. I am way over time, but I'm going to submit to you a theory. Okay? And if you think I'm nuts, well then, you and my wife would get along just fine. All right, let's look at Revelation 20. I mentioned it. We can look at it here. Revelation 20. That's not it. Verse 1, I saw an angel come down from heaven having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold of the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled, and after that he must be loosed a little season. So, it is possible for Satan to be bound, and then for Satan to be unbound. And then for Satan to be bound again at a later date. A temporary binding, if you will. So one of the things, you just put this in your brain and let it roll around, okay? And if I'm nuts, okay, fine. And this is not a hill I want to fight over. It's not something, whatever. It's just my theory. It's my Bible theory. My theory is, I submit to you that after his rather ignominious defeat, well, okay, let me say this. If you go through the rest of the Gospels, you see devils, you see unclean spirits, you see foul spirits. You do not see Satan. He's mentioned right there at the beginning of the Gospels, and after that defeat in the wilderness, you don't see him again. In fact, I think the next time he's mentioned is in the church epistles. I could be wrong by that. He's not mentioned in the rest of the Gospels. I looked. It just doesn't happen. So here's my theory. After his rather anonymous defeat in the garden, Satan is somehow limited in what he can do until Christ accomplishes what he came to do. I think that defeat in the wilderness was very significant, and I don't think we've even scratched the surface of the importance of what happened there. It's very much a Job 1 kind of scene in which Satan is allowed to do this and go no further. Go here, but you only do that. Come here, and just very limited in what he can do. And I think that is a direct result of the defeat there in the wilderness. And so if you take all that, that's how I'd sort of jive all together. A temporary binding of some kind of prelude to a final defeat. Well, we went over an hour, folks. And my soul, and I don't feel like I did not even get to the unpardonable sin that everyone's so interested in talking about, and about which I honestly know very little. So we're going to go ahead and stop here. We'll get into the other stuff at some future date. Thank you for listening. Thank you for all you that are here for the first time. If you made it this far, I'm as surprised as you are. This is Michael. This has been the Street Preacher's Corner, and I thank you for listening, and I will see you on the other side.